The blood on Victoria Garrett's apron had long since dried to a rusty brown, but the memory of the fight that caused it remained fresh in her mind as she scrubbed tables in the dimly lit saloon at 3 in the morning. She had learned in her 2 years working at the Lucky Star that violence came as naturally to some men as breathing, and cleaning up after their destruction had become just another part of surviving in Linden, Montana territory, in the autumn of 1883. The kerosene lamps flickered against the rough wooden walls as Victoria wrung out her rag into a bucket of water that had turned gray with grime. Her hands were raw and red, the skin cracked from lye soap and hard work, but she continued scrubbing because Martha, the saloon owner, would dock her pay if the tables weren't spotless by sunrise. At 22 years old, Victoria had already lived more lifetimes than most women her age, each one harder than the last. Her father's death 3 years ago had left her with nothing but debts. Her mother had passed when Victoria was just 12, leaving her to care for her younger brother until scarlet fever took him too. The farm had been sold to pay what they owed, and Victoria had found herself alone in a territory that showed no mercy to women without family or fortune. The Lucky Star had been her last resort, the only place willing to hire a woman with no references and no one to vouch for her character. She served whiskey to miners, cowboys, and drifters who passed through Linden on their way to somewhere better. She smiled when they made crude jokes, dodged wandering hands with practiced efficiency, and counted every coin she earned like it might be her last. Because in many ways, each one might be. The front door creaked open, bringing with it a gust of cold October air that made the lamps dance. Victoria looked up sharply, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept tucked in her boot. No one came to the Lucky Star at this hour unless they were trouble. The man who stepped inside was tall and lean, with dust covering his dark coat and hat. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had spent long days in the saddle, and when he removed his hat, Victoria saw a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, perhaps only a few years older than herself. His eyes were a striking gray-green, and they held a weariness that she recognized because she saw it in her own reflection every morning. "We're closed," Victoria said, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Come back at noon." "I'm not looking for whiskey," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Saw your light on and thought someone might point me toward a stable. My horse is about done in, and so am I." Victoria studied him more carefully. His clothes were worn but well made. His gun belt sat comfortably on his hips like he knew how to use it. And there was something in his manner that suggested breeding, education even, beneath the trail dust. She had become an expert at reading men in her time at the Lucky Star, and this one didn't set off the usual warnings that jangled in her head when real danger walked through the door. "Thompson's stable is 2 blocks north," she said, softening slightly. "Tell him Martha sent you, and he'll give you a fair price." The man nodded his thanks but didn't immediately leave. Instead, he looked around the saloon with an expression Victoria couldn't quite decipher. "Hard work, cleaning up after other people's messes," he said finally. "It's honest work," Victoria replied, though she heard the defensiveness in her own voice. "Didn't say it wasn't." He turned those gray-green eyes back to her, and something in his gaze made her feel exposed, seen in a way she hadn't been in years. "I'm Grant Lucas. Just came up from Wyoming looking for ranch work. Victoria Garrett," she heard herself say, though she rarely gave her name to strangers. "You won't find much ranch work this late in the season. Most outfits have their crews set for winter." "Figured as much," Grant said, "but I've got to try. Can't keep drifting forever." There was something in the way he said it that resonated deep in Victoria's chest. She understood that bone-deep exhaustion, the weariness that came from having no place to call home, no one to call family. Before she could stop herself, she said, "The Morrison Ranch about 10 miles east of here. They might still be hiring. Lost a few hands last month when some of the boys headed to the gold fields." Grant's expression shifted into something that might have been gratitude. "Much obliged, Miss Garrett." He settled his hat back on his head. "Maybe I'll see you around if the Morrisons take me on." After he left, Victoria stood alone in the empty saloon, listening to the wind howl outside. She told herself it was foolish to remember the way Grant Lucas had looked at her, like she was a person worth seeing rather than just another saloon girl. Meng came and went through Linden all the time, and she had learned long ago not to pin her hopes on any of them. But as she finished her cleaning and climbed the narrow stairs to the tiny room she rented above the saloon, Victoria found herself hoping, just a little, that Grant would find work at the Morrison Ranch. 3 days passed before she saw him again. The Lucky Star was busy that night, packed with miners who had just been paid and were eager to spend their wages on whiskey and cards. Victoria moved between the tables with a practiced grace, delivering drinks, collecting empty glasses, and skillfully avoiding the grabbing hands that reached for her skirts. She was at the bar, waiting for Martha to pour another round of whiskey, when she felt someone watching her. Turning, she found Grant Lucas seated at a corner table, nursing a single glass of beer. He had cleaned up since their last meeting, his face shaved and his dark hair trimmed, wearing a fresh shirt under a leather vest. When their eyes met, he raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. Victoria felt her heart skip in a way that irritated her. She had no time for foolish feelings, no space in her life for anything beyond survival. Still, when she delivered drinks to the table next to his, she found herself angling closer. "The Morrisons hire you?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Grant nodded. "Start tomorrow. Wanted to thank you proper for the tip. Can I buy you a drink? I don't drink with customers," Victoria said automatically, the rule so ingrained it came out without thought. "Fair enough," Grant replied easily. "Then maybe you could just spare a minute to sit. Been a long time since I had a conversation with someone who didn't want something from me." Victoria glanced around the saloon. Martha was watching from behind the bar with narrowed eyes, but the tables were all served for the moment, and Victoria knew she had a few minutes before the next round of demands. Against her better judgment, she slid into the chair across from Grant. "1 minute," she said firmly. "1 minute," Grant agreed. Up close, she could see that his eyes held flecks of gold among the gray and green, and there was a scar along his jawline that looked like it had come from a knife. "You from Linden originally?" "Nebraska," Victoria said. "Came here with my father after my mother died. He thought we could make a fresh start, farm some land." She didn't know why she was telling him this, why the words came so easily when she usually kept her past locked away. "Didn't work out the way he planned." "Things rarely do," Grant said quietly. "I'm from Colorado myself. Family had a cattle operation until the winter of '81 wiped us out. Lost everything, including my pa. My mother remarried, moved to Denver. I've been working ranches ever since, trying to save enough to start my own place." "That's a good dream," Victoria said, meaning it. "What about you?" Grant leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her in a way that made her feel both uncomfortable and strangely warmed. "What are your dreams, Victoria Garrett?" No one had asked her that in so long that she had almost forgotten she was allowed to have dreams. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she couldn't speak around the sudden tightness in her throat. "I dream about having a place of my own," she finally said. "Nothing fancy. Just somewhere clean and quiet where no one can make me leave." "That doesn't seem like too much to ask for," Grant said. "You would be surprised what's too much to ask for when you're a woman alone," Victoria replied, harder than she intended. Before Grant could respond, a crash from across the room made them both turn. One of the miners had knocked over a table, and Martha was already shouting for Victoria to clean it up. She rose quickly, her minute of respite over, but Grant caught her wrist gently. "I'll be at the Morrison place if you ever want to talk again," he said. "About dreams or anything else." Victoria pulled her hand away, but carefully, not wanting to seem rude. "I don't have time for talking, Mr. Lucas. I've got work to do." She spent the rest of the night trying not to think about the warmth of Grant's hand on her wrist or the sincerity in his eyes when he asked about her dreams. But when she finally collapsed into bed as the sun rose over the mountains, his words followed her into sleep. Over the next few weeks, Grant became a regular presence at the Lucky Star, though he never drank more than a single beer and never stayed late into the rowdy hours when the miners got mean. He would sit at his corner table and wait until Victoria had a spare moment. Then they would talk. Just talk about everything and nothing. And Victoria found herself looking forward to those brief conversations more than she wanted to admit. Grant told her about his work at the Morrison Ranch, about the horses he was training, and the plans he had to eventually buy his own land. Victoria told him about the books she had loved as a child, about her mother's garden in Nebraska, about the little moments of beauty she found in her hard life. With Grant, she could be more than just a saloon girl working to survive. She could be herself, whoever that was under all the armor she had built. One cold November evening, Victoria was walking back to the Lucky Star after running an errand for Martha when three men stepped out of an alley. She recognized them immediately as troublemakers who frequented the saloon, the kind who saw women like her as fair game for whatever they wanted to take. "Well, look who we have here," the tallest one said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "All alone without the old woman to protect you." Victoria's hand went to the knife in her boot, but there were three of them and only one of her. Fear spiked through her chest, sharp and cold. "Step aside," she said, keeping her voice level. "I don't want trouble." "Maybe we do," another man said, moving closer. "The lady asked you to step aside." The voice came from behind the men, and Victoria's heart leaped as Grant stepped into view. He wasn't wearing his gun, but there was something in his stance, in the cold fury in his eyes, that made the three men hesitate. "This isn't your business, Cowboy," the tall man said, but his bravado had wavered. "I'm making it my business," Grant replied evenly. "You can walk away or we can settle this another way. Your choice." For a long moment, the tension stretched taut as a wire. Then the tall man spat on the ground and jerked his head at his companions. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway." They walked away, and Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against her skirts to still them. Grant moved to her side, his anger fading into concern. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," Victoria said, but her voice betrayed her. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "I was on my way to see you," Grant admitted. "Had something I wanted to ask you." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Victoria, you don't belong in that saloon. You're better than scrubbing floors and dodging drunk miners. Come work at the Morrison Ranch. Mrs. Morrison needs help with the house and the cooking. It's honest work, and she'll treat you fair." Victoria stared at him, the offer so unexpected that she couldn't immediately process it. "I can't just leave Martha. She gave me work when no one else would." "Martha works you half to death for barely enough to keep you fed," Grant said, his voice urgent. "You deserve better. You deserve a chance at the kind of life you dream about. Why do you care?" The question burst out of Victoria before she could stop it. Why does it matter to you what happens to me? Grant stepped closer, and in the dim light from the nearby street lamp, she could see the raw honesty in his face. Because in the weeks I've known you, you've become the best part of my days. Because when I think about my future, I want you in it. Because I'm falling in love with you, Victoria Garrett, and I can't stand watching you work yourself into the ground in that place. The world seemed to tilt beneath Victoria's feet. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such open emotion and vulnerability. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his feelings were real and not just another way for a man to use her. But fear held her back, the fear of hoping for something good and having it ripped away. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," Grant said. "I'll be here." That night, Victoria lay awake in her small room, Grant's words echoing in her mind. She thought about the calluses on her hands, the ache in her back from long hours on her feet, the constant weariness she carried like a weight. She thought about the way Grant looked at her, the gentleness in his hands, the respect he showed her when so many others showed her none. By morning, she had made her decision. Martha wasn't pleased when Victoria gave her notice, but the old woman was practical enough to know she couldn't force anyone to stay. "You're making a mistake," Martha said, counting out the wages she owed. "Men like him always want something. You'll learn that soon enough." "Maybe," Victoria said, "but I have to try. I can't spend the rest of my life afraid of what might go wrong." Mrs. Morrison was a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She welcomed Victoria into her home with a warmth that brought tears to Victoria's eyes, showing her to a small but clean room in the ranch house and explaining her duties. The work was still hard, cooking and cleaning for the ranch hands and the Morrison family, but it was different from the saloon. Here she was treated with respect. Here she could breathe. Grant had been right. This was better. She saw him every day at the ranch, their conversations growing longer and deeper as winter settled over Montana. He told her about his dreams of having his own spread someday, a place where he could raise horses and cattle and build something lasting. Victoria shared her own hopes, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she realized Grant truly listened, truly cared about her thoughts and feelings. On a clear December afternoon, Grant asked her to go riding with him. Victoria had limited experience with horses, but Grant was patient, helping her mount and then leading them out across the snow-covered rangeland. The world was breathtakingly beautiful, all white expanses and blue sky, the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. They stopped near a frozen creek, and Grant helped Victoria down from her horse. For a moment, they stood close together, their breath mingling in the cold air. Victoria's heart was pounding, and she knew this was a turning point, a moment that would change everything. "I meant what I said that night," Grant said softly. "About falling in love with you. It's only gotten stronger, Victoria. Every day I spend with you, I'm more certain that you're the one I want to build a life with." Victoria looked up at him, seeing the truth in his eyes, the love he wasn't trying to hide. And she realized with startling clarity that she felt the same way. Somewhere between those late-night conversations at the Lucky Star and these past weeks at the ranch, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Grant Lucas. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling like a confession and a liberation all at once. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." Grant's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He cupped her face in his gloved hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. Victoria kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love and trust into that moment. Feeling the last of her walls crumble when they finally pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I don't have much right now, just my wages and my dreams, but I promise I will spend every day of my life making you happy. Marry me, Victoria." "Yes," she breathed, joy flooding through her like wildfire. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Linden, with the Morrisons as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress that Mrs. Morrison had helped her make, simple blue wool that matched her eyes, and Grant wore his best clothes, his hair combed back and his face shining with happiness. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, and Victoria felt the words settle into her bones like a promise. When Grant slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she saw her future opening up before her, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Mr. Morrison had given them 3 days away from work as a wedding gift, and Grant had used his savings to rent a small cabin on the edge of town. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms with a fireplace and a bed, but to Victoria, it felt like a palace. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Grant patient and gentle as he loved her, murmuring words of adoration against her skin. Victoria had known fear and hardship and loneliness, but here in Grant's arms, she knew something entirely different. She knew safety. She knew love. She knew home. In the morning, they lay tangled together beneath quilts, watching the winter sun paint patterns on the wall. Grant traced lazy circles on Victoria's shoulder and she pressed closer to his warmth. "I've been thinking," Grant said quietly, "about the future, about what we want to build together." "Tell me," Victoria encouraged, running her fingers through his dark hair. "The Morrisons have been good to us, but I want more than just working someone else's land. I want what I told you about. Our own ranch, our own home. I've been saving every penny I can, and I think in another year or 2, we might have enough for a down payment on some land." Victoria's heart swelled with love for this man who dreamed big and worked hard to make those dreams real. "Where would we go?" "There's good land opening up in the valley south of here," Grant said. "Not the best soil, but good for grazing. We could start small, build it up over time." "It would be hard work." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Victoria said firmly. "Not if we're doing it together." Grant kissed her softly. "Together. I like the sound of that." The next 2 years passed in a blur of work and saving and dreaming. Victoria continued helping Mrs. Morrison, and Grant took on extra jobs when he could, breaking horses for neighbors and doing odd repairs around town. Every coin they earned went into a coffee tin that they kept hidden under a floorboard in their small room in the ranch house, which the Morrisons had given them after their marriage. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard days when the work seemed endless, cold nights when money was tight, moments when their dream felt impossibly far away. But they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Victoria had never known she could be this happy, that love could be this steady and sure. In the spring of 1886, Grant came home with news that made Victoria's hands shake with excitement. A rancher named Thompson was selling 200 acres in the valley, looking to retire and move to California to live with his daughter. The price was fair, and with what they had saved plus a loan from the bank, they could afford it. "It's not much," Grant said, spreading the property survey on their small table. "The house needs work, and we'll have to build up the herd from almost nothing. But it's ours, Victoria. If we want it, it can be ours." Victoria looked at the map, at the lines and numbers that represented their future, and felt tears prick her eyes. "I want it," she said. "I want to build our life there." They moved onto their land in late May when the valley was green with spring growth. The house was small and needed repairs, but it had good bones and a view of the mountains that took Victoria's breath away. Grant threw himself into fixing up the buildings and fences while Victoria planted a garden and made the house into a home. They bought 6 cows and a bull with money loaned by Mr. Morrison, who had become like a father to them both. Grant had his own horse, a sturdy gelding named Duke, and they purchased a gentle mare for Victoria. It was terrifying and exhilarating to be on their own, but they worked from sunrise to sunset, building something that was entirely theirs. One evening in late summer, Victoria stood on the porch of their house, watching Grant walk up from the barn. He was tired, his shirt stained with sweat and dirt, but he was smiling. When he reached her, he wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Victoria admitted. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "It's real," Grant assured her. "We made this real." Victoria turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. "I have something to tell you," she said when they parted. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Grant's expression shifted to concern. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," Victoria said, watching his face carefully. "In February, I think." For a moment, Grant simply stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, careful even in his excitement, then set her down gently and kissed her with such love and tenderness that Victoria felt her heart might burst. "A baby," he kept repeating, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby." That winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Grant was attentive to Victoria's every need, insisting she rest while he handled the bulk of the work. Mrs. Morrison visited often, bringing supplies and advice, becoming the mother Victoria had lost so many years ago. Their son was born on a February morning in 1887, arriving with the dawn as snow fell softly outside. Victoria labored through the night with Mrs. Morrison and the town doctor attending her, and Grant pacing holes in the floor of the front room. When the baby's cry finally filled the air, Grant burst into the bedroom, his eyes wide and wet with tears. "A boy," Mrs. Morrison said, placing the tiny bundle in Victoria's arms. "Strong and healthy." Victoria looked down at her son, at his perfect little face and tiny fingers, and felt love unlike anything she had ever known. When Grant knelt beside the bed and reached out to touch the baby's soft hair, she saw the same overwhelming emotion reflected in his eyes. "What should we name him?" Grant asked softly. Victoria had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas," she said, "after my father, Thomas Lucas." "Thomas," Grant repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." Watching her husband hold their son for the first time, seeing the gentleness and wonder in his face, Victoria thought about how far she had come. From the lonely, frightened woman scrubbing tables in a saloon to this, a wife and mother with a home and a family and a future full of promise. It seemed impossible, miraculous even. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd increasing, their land becoming more productive. Thomas grew into a bright, active boy who loved following his father around the ranch, learning about horses and cattle. In 1889, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah after Victoria's mother. 2 years later came another son, James. The work never stopped, the challenges never ended, but Victoria and Grant faced everything together. They supported each other through droughts and hard winters, through the loss of cattle to disease and the constant struggle to make ends meet. But they also celebrated the good times, the moments of joy and laughter that made all the hardship worthwhile. One evening in the summer of 1892, Victoria sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas, now 5 years old, was playing with his younger siblings in the yard while Grant finished up the evening chores. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of her garden, and from somewhere in the distance came the sound of cattle lowing. Grant emerged from the barn and walked over to the children, scooping up little James and making him shriek with laughter. Sarah ran to him, demanding her turn, and Victoria watched with a smile as her husband spun both children around, their joy echoing across the valley. This was everything she had ever wanted, she realized. Not wealth or luxury or an easy life, but this. A home built on love, children who knew they were cherished, a partner who stood beside her through everything. She had spent so long just trying to survive, but Grant had offered her something different. He had offered her a life worth living. As if sensing her thoughts, Grant looked up and caught her eye. Even after all these years, that look still made her heart skip. He set the children down and walked over to the porch, settling onto the step beside her and taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Victoria said honestly. "About how different my life could have been." "Our life," Grant corrected gently. "It's our life, Victoria. Everything we built together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the golden evening light. "Do you remember that night you first came into the Lucky Star? I almost didn't tell you about the Morrison Ranch." "But you did," Grant said. "You took a chance on a dusty cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination." "Best decision I ever made," Victoria murmured. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Thomas was teaching Sarah a song he had learned, his young voice carrying clearly across the yard. James had found a stick and was waving it around like a sword, fighting invisible enemies. "I love you," Grant said suddenly. "I know I tell you every day, but I want you to really hear it. You're the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I've ever known. You gave me everything I ever wanted, and I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon." Victoria turned to look at him, seeing the depth of emotion in his eyes. "I love you too, more than words can say." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 9 years of marriage, 3 children, and a lifetime of promises kept. When they parted, Victoria rested her hand on his cheek. "We did good, didn't we?" she said. "Built something real and lasting." "We did better than good," Grant replied. "We built a home. We built a family. We built a life." As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Victoria called the children in for dinner. They came running, all energy and noise and love, tumbling through the door into the warm kitchen where the table was already set. Grant helped her get everyone settled, and they said grace together, thanking God for the food and for each other. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Victoria and Grant lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. Through the open window came the cool night breeze and the sound of crickets singing in the grass. "You ever think about what comes next?" Victoria asked softly. "About the future, all the time," Grant admitted. "I think about watching our children grow up, about maybe adding more land to the ranch, about growing old with you." "Growing old with you sounds nice," Victoria said, smiling in the darkness. "We'll sit on that porch when we're gray and watch our grandchildren play in the yard," Grant said. "And we'll remember all the years that got us there, all the struggles and triumphs, and we'll know it was all worth it." "It's already worth it," Victoria whispered. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1894, Victoria's 4th pregnancy ended in a miscarriage that left her heartbroken. Grant held her through the grief, and together they mourned the child they would never know. But they took comfort in the 3 healthy children they had, and in time, the sharp edge of the pain dulled. The ranch prospered. By 1896, They had tripled the size of their herd and purchased an additional 100 acres from a neighbor who was moving east. Grant had developed a reputation as an excellent horse trainer, and people came from all over the territory to buy his stock. Victoria's garden had expanded to include not just vegetables for their family, but produce she sold in town, earning money that went into the children's education fund. Thomas proved to be a natural with animals, spending every spare moment learning from his father. Sarah had inherited her mother's love of books and could often be found reading under the big cottonwood tree near the house. James was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with such a sweet nature that it was impossible to stay mad at him for long. In the spring of 1897, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. She was 36 years old now, and this pregnancy was harder than the others had been. Grant worried constantly, but Victoria was determined. In December, she gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Emma, who came into the world small but fierce. The house was chaotic with 5 children, but it was also full of love and laughter. Grant built an addition, giving the older children more space and creating a room where Victoria could escape when she needed a moment of quiet. They hired help during busy seasons, young men who reminded Victoria of Grant when she had first met him, full of dreams and determination. One autumn evening in 1899, as the new century approached, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch a meteor shower. The children were bundled in blankets, the older ones helping the younger ones spot falling stars. Victoria sat with Grant, her hand in his, feeling the contentment that came from a life well lived. "Make a wish," young Sarah said, pointing at a particularly bright meteor. "What should I wish for?" James asked. "You have to decide for yourself," Thomas told his brother seriously. "It's your wish." Victoria glanced at Grant. "What would you wish for?" "Nothing," Grant said simply. "I have everything I could ever want right here." "That's cheating," Anna said, making everyone laugh, but Victoria understood what Grant meant. She felt it too, this sense of completeness, of having found her place in the world. The scared young woman who had scrubbed floors in a saloon felt like a different person, someone from another lifetime. That Victoria had been surviving. This Victoria was living. As the 20th century dawned, bringing with it changes and challenges that would reshape the American West, the Lucas family remained steadfast on their ranch in the Montana Valley. Thomas, now 13, was already talking about the day he would run the ranch himself. Sarah wanted to be a teacher. James changed his mind about his future every week, but he was only 10, and there was time for him to figure it out. The twins were still too young to know what they wanted, content to follow their older siblings around and get into whatever trouble they could find. Victoria and Grant had developed a rhythm over their years together, a partnership so deep that they often knew what the other was thinking without words. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were occupied, talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams and memories. One spring morning in 1902, Victoria was working in her garden when Grant came riding up on Duke, moving faster than usual. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt a flutter of concern when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked as he dismounted. "Nothing's wrong," Grant said, but he was grinning. "I just came from town." "You remember the Anderson place, the one we always said would be perfect for expanding?" Victoria nodded. The Anderson ranch bordered their property to the west, with good grazing land and a reliable water source. They had talked for years about buying it if the opportunity ever arose. "Anderson's ready to sell," Grant said, "and he's offering us first chance at it. Says he respects how we've built up our place and wants to see the land go to someone who will care for it." Victoria's breath caught. "Can we afford it?" Just barely, Grant admitted. We would have to use everything we've saved, and we would be stretched thin for a couple of years. But Victoria, it would more than double our operation. We could build something really substantial, something to leave to our children. She looked around at the ranch they had built from nothing, at the house they had expanded over the years, at the gardens and pastures and buildings that represented decades of hard work. Then she looked at her husband, at the hope and excitement in his eyes, and made her decision. "Let's do it," she said. They purchased the Anderson place in the summer of 1902, and it was everything Grant had promised. The land was good, the buildings were solid, and the expanded operation allowed them to increase their herd significantly. It meant more work, longer hours, and financial stress, but they had weathered hard times before and knew they could do it again. Thomas stepped up to take on more responsibility, working alongside his father like a full partner. Sarah helped her mother manage the household and the younger children. Even James, despite his youth, contributed by helping with the animals and running errands. The twins were still too young for serious work, but they did their part in small ways. By 1905, the gamble had paid off. The expanded ranch was thriving, and they had paid off the debt they had taken on. Grant was 44 years old, his dark hair now showing threads of silver, and Victoria was 43, with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that still bore the calluses of hard work. But they were happy, prosperous, and secure in ways they had once only dreamed of. Thomas had begun courting a girl from town, the daughter of the mercantile owner, and Grant and Victoria could see a wedding on the horizon. Sarah had started teaching at the local school, fulfilling her dream while still living at home. James had finally settled on wanting to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine. The twins were 10 years old now, still inseparable, with their mother's determination and their father's easy charm. One evening, Victoria and Grant took a rare ride together, leaving the children in Thomas's capable care. They rode to the spot where Grant had first proposed, the frozen creek now flowing freely in the summer warmth. Dismounting, they stood together looking out over the land they had built their life on. "You remember that night I found you in the alley?" Grant asked. "When those men were bothering you, how could I forget?" Victoria replied. "You were my knight in dusty chaps," Grant laughed. "I was terrified. I'd never been so scared in my life, not because of those men, but because I thought I might lose you before I even had the chance to tell you how I felt." "I was scared too," Victoria admitted. "When you offered me the job at the Morrisons, when you asked me to marry you. I was terrified of hoping for something good. But you did it anyway," Grant said. "You were brave enough to take a chance." Victoria leaned against him, feeling his arms come around her. "We were both brave. We took a chance on each other." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that never got old no matter how many times they saw them. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a chance meeting in a saloon to this moment, standing on land they owned, having built a legacy they could pass on to their children. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me," Victoria said. "When I was working at the Lucky Star, most people looked right through me like I was invisible. But you saw me. You saw who I really was, who I could be." Grant turned her in his arms so they were face to face. "I saw a strong, beautiful woman who deserved better than what life had given her. I saw my future, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time." He kissed her then, and Victoria kissed him back, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude and devotion into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should head back," Grant said reluctantly, "before the children burn down the house." "Thomas won't let that happen," Victoria said confidently. "But yes, let's go home. Home. The word still filled her with warmth every time she said it. For so many years she hadn't had a home, just places she stayed while trying to survive. But Grant had given her that, a home in every sense of the word. As they rode back across their land, Victoria felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would always be challenges, she knew they would face them together. That was what love was, she had learned. Not just the romance and passion, though there was still plenty of that even after all these years, but the partnership, the choosing to stand together through everything life threw at you. The years that followed brought the changes that time always brings. Thomas married his sweetheart in the spring of 1907, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch property. A year later, Victoria and Grant welcomed their first grandchild, a boy named Grant after his grandfather. Victoria cried when she held him, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family they had created. Sarah married a teacher from a nearby town and moved away, though she visited often. James left for veterinary school in Missouri, writing long letters home about his studies and adventures. The twins, Anna and Emma, were growing into young women, bright and capable and full of dreams of their own. Grant's hair turned fully gray, and Victoria's dark blonde locks showed more silver with each passing year. Their hands were gnarled from decades of work, their faces weathered by sun and wind and time. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love in a Montana saloon all those years ago. By 1910, Thomas and his wife had given them 3 grandchildren, and the ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Montana had achieved statehood in 1889, and Linden had grown from a rough frontier town to a proper community with schools and churches and civic organizations. The wild days of the Old West were fading into memory, replaced by a more civilized, structured society. One summer evening, as Victoria approached her 50th birthday, she sat on the porch with Grant watching the sunset. Thomas's children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Inside the house, Anna and Emma were helping prepare dinner, their voices mingling with the clatter of pots and pans. 50 years old, Victoria mused. When did we get so old? Speak for yourself, Grant said with a grin. I'm still as spry as ever, Victoria laughed. You're 51, and I heard you groaning when you got out of bed this morning. That was the bed groaning, not me, Grant protested, making her laugh harder. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring, worn smooth by decades of wear. Seriously, though, I wouldn't change a single thing. Every year, every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard times, Victoria asked. The droughts and the money troubles and the nights we didn't know if we would make it through. Especially those times, Grant said firmly. Because they showed us what we're made of. They proved that we're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Victoria squeezed his hand. I love you, Grant Lucas. I have loved you for more than half my life, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Victoria Lucas. You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but dreams, and you made every single one of those dreams come true. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Victoria felt the same contentment she had felt so many times over the years. This was her life, the one she had built with her own hands and her own heart. The frightened young woman who had scrubbed tables to survive would barely recognize her now, and that was exactly how it should be. The next decade brought more changes. James completed his veterinary training and returned to Montana, setting up practice in Linden. He married a rancher's daughter and settled into a life of service to the community. Anna and Emma both married within a year of each other, Anna to a banker, from Helena and Emma to a neighboring rancher's son. The house that had once been full of children's voices grew quiet, but the visits from their grown children and grandchildren kept it from ever feeling empty. Victoria and Grant were grandparents many times over now, watching the next generation grow up on the land they had claimed. Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though Grant still rode out most days, unable to stay away from the work that had defined so much of his life. In 1918, as the Great War ended and the world changed in ways they could never have imagined when they were young, Victoria and Grant celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. They were in their late 50s now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their love had only deepened with time. They held a celebration at the ranch, with all their children and grandchildren gathered. The house was full of noise and laughter, 3 generations of the family Victoria and Grant had created. Looking around the table at dinner, seeing all those faces that carried pieces of her and Grant, Victoria felt her eyes fill with tears. "What is it, Ma?" Thomas asked, noticing her expression. "I'm just happy," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "So incredibly happy." Grant reached over and took her hand, and she saw that his eyes were wet too. They had built this, she thought. From nothing, from the ashes of their old lives, they had built this beautiful, thriving family. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Victoria and Grant sat on the porch in their customary spot. The night was warm, the stars brilliant in the Montana sky. Grant had his arm around Victoria's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, fitting perfectly the way she always had. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Victoria asked. "When you came into the Lucky Star looking for directions." "I said a lot of things," Grant replied. "Which part?" "You said you couldn't keep drifting forever," Victoria said. "That you had to try to make a real life." "I remember," Grant said softly. "I had been drifting for so long, working one ranch after another, never putting down roots. I was tired of it, tired of being alone." "And then you found me," Victoria said. "And then I found you," Grant agreed. "Or maybe you found me. Either way, we found each other, and everything changed." Victoria tilted her head back to look at the stars. "If someone had told me that night, when I was scrubbing tables at 3 in the morning, that one day I would have all this, I never would have believed them. It seemed impossible." "The best things usually do," Grant said, "but we made it possible. We worked for it, fought for it, built it piece by piece." "I'm glad you walked into that saloon," Victoria whispered. "So am I," Grant said. "Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance, cattle moved in the pastures, and somewhere a coyote sang to the moon. These were the sounds of home, as familiar and comforting as breathing. As they grew older, Victoria and Grant gradually stepped back from the active work of the ranch, letting Thomas and his sons take over. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, Victoria with her garden and her reading, Grant with his horses and his grandchildren. They took walks together in the evenings, rode out to their favorite spots on the ranch, and sat on the porch watching the world go by. In the spring of 1925, as Victoria turned 64 and Grant 66, they planted a tree together in the yard. It was a cottonwood sapling, the same kind as the big tree that Sarah had loved to read under as a child. They planted it for their great-grandchildren, who were just starting to arrive, and for all the generations that would come after. "Something to remember us by," Grant said as they patted the soil around the young tree. "They won't need a tree to remember us," Victoria said. "We're in their blood, in the land they'll inherit, in the stories that will be passed down." "True," Grant acknowledged. but I like the idea of something living and growing, something that will be here long after we're gone." Victoria understood. The tree was a symbol of everything they had built, everything they had created together. It would grow tall and strong, providing shade for future generations the way the big cottonwood had for Sarah. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their great-grandchildren play, Victoria felt Grant's hand find hers. No words were needed. After more than 40 years together, they could communicate volumes with a simple touch. "I'm tired," Grant admitted quietly. "More than usual." Victoria felt a flutter of concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just old," Grant said with a small smile. "Nothing to worry about." But Victoria did worry. She had noticed that Grant moved more slowly these days, that he tired more easily. When she mentioned it to James, their veterinarian son who had become adept at recognizing signs of illness in all creatures, he grew concerned too. The doctor in town confirmed what Victoria feared. Grant's heart was failing, worn out by decades of hard work and the simple passage of time. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable and wait. Victoria refused to accept it at first, raging against the unfairness of it. They had survived so much, built so much together. It couldn't end like this, with Grant's body simply giving out. But as the weeks passed and Grant grew weaker, she had to face the reality. Grant handled it with the same quiet strength he had shown throughout their life together. He made sure all his affairs were in order, talked with Thomas about the ranch, and spent time with each of his children and grandchildren, offering advice and sharing memories. But his time with Victoria was sacred. Every evening, even when he was too weak to go outside, they would sit together in their bedroom, holding hands and talking about their life together. Victoria brought out old photographs, and they laughed over the memories captured in fading images. "I don't want to leave you," Grant said one night, tears running down his weathered face. "I can't imagine not being with you." "Then don't," Victoria said fiercely, though she knew it was futile. "Stay, fight. We've overcome everything else together." "This is one fight I can't win," Grant said gently. "But Victoria, listen to me. What we had, what we built together, it doesn't end when I do. It continues in our children, in this ranch, in every life we've touched. That's immortality right there." "I don't want immortality," Victoria sobbed. "I just want you." Grant pulled her close, and they held each other as they had so many times over the years, drawing strength and comfort from their connection. "You'll always have me," he whispered. "In your heart, in your memories, in everything around you. I'll never truly be gone." On a warm June morning in 1926, with all his children gathered around his bed and Victoria holding his hand, Grant Lucas closed his eyes for the last time. His passing was peaceful, a gentle slipping away like falling asleep, and Victoria felt the moment his spirit left, felt the space where he had been in her heart suddenly echo with emptiness. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Grant had been respected and loved by many, a man who had built his life on hard work, honesty, and integrity. Victoria stood dry-eyed through the service, through the burial on a hill overlooking the ranch, through the gathering afterward where people shared stories and memories. It wasn't until that night, alone in the bed she had shared with Grant for 40 years, that she finally broke. The sobs came from deep within her, a grief so profound it felt like it might tear her apart. Her children wanted to stay with her to comfort her, but Victoria sent them away. This pain was hers alone, this loss too deep to share. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Victoria's life, harder even than those desperate days working at the Lucky Star. She moved through each day mechanically, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. The ranch, the family, the life she and Grant had built, All felt hollow without him there to share it. But slowly, gradually, she began to heal. She found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the stories they told about Grant, in the ways she could see him reflected in each of them. Thomas had his father's integrity, Sarah his kindness, James his gentle strength. The grandchildren carried pieces of him too, in their smiles and their mannerisms and their dreams. Victoria began to spend time at Grant's grave, talking to him the way she had when he was alive. She told him about the children, about the ranch, about the little moments of her days. Whether he could hear her or not didn't matter. It made her feel close to him, and that was enough. One afternoon, about 6 months after Grant's death, Victoria was sitting on the porch when young Grant, her first grandchild, now a strapping young man of 19, came to sit beside her. "Tell me about Grandpa," he said. "About when you first met." Victoria looked at her grandson, seeing so much of Grant in his face, and began to tell the story. She told him about the dusty cowboy who walked into the Lucky Star looking for directions, about the offer of a different life, about falling in love and building a dream together. As she talked, she felt some of the weight lift from her heart. This was how Grant would live on, she realized. Not just in the land and the buildings, but in the stories, in the memories passed down from generation to generation. Their love story would become part of the family history, a reminder of what was possible when two people chose to build a life together. Victoria lived for another 12 years, surrounded by the family she and Grant had created. She watched more grandchildren marry, welcomed great-great-grandchildren, and saw the ranch continue to thrive under Thomas's stewardship. She kept her garden until the very end, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing living things. She remained in the house she and Grant had built, refusing all offers to move in with her children. This was her home, filled with memories of the man she had loved, and she wanted to spend her remaining days surrounded by those memories. On a spring morning in 1938, Victoria Lucas passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was buried next to Grant on the hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones side by side the way they had stood side by side through life. The ranch remained in the family for generations, the Lucas name becoming synonymous with integrity and hard work in that part of Montana. The cottonwood tree Victoria and Grant had planted grew tall and strong, its branches spreading wide to provide shade for summer picnics and shelter for children's games. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the valley, it was said you could almost hear the echo of laughter from the porch, the sound of a love story that had changed two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The story of Victoria and Grant Lucas became legend in Linden, told and retold until the details took on an almost mythical quality. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. A woman working to survive had met a cowboy who offered her a different life, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their love had transformed them both, proving that even in the harsh reality of the Old West, hope and love could triumph, and two people with nothing but dreams and determination could create a legacy that would outlive them both.